Imagine silence. Not the calm, peaceful silence of a country night, but a heavy, oppressive silence. The kind that comes before a storm. A silence filled with unspoken tension. Now, imagine that silence is suddenly pierced by a sound. But this is no ordinary sound. It's not a scream, not an explosion, not a siren. It is a sensation, a feeling that is born not in your ears, but deep inside your skull. It's a directed beam of pure pressure, a vibration that makes your eyeballs tremble in their sockets, a high-frequency, pulsing screech, like the sound of 1,000,000 metallic insects drilling into your bones from the inside. At the same time, a low-frequency, guttural hum resonates in your chest, triggering a wave of nausea. The world around you begins to swim. The room tilts, losing its right angles. The floor drops out from under you, even though you're standing still. Dizziness sets in, so intense that the only option is to fall to your knees, clutching the floor to keep the planet from spinning off its axis. This is not just a sound. This is an invasion. It is physical violence, committed by an invisible force. This is what more than 24 American and Canadian diplomats in Havana, Cuba, experienced in late 2016. This was the birth of a phenomenon the world would soon come to know as Havana Syndrome. It all started quietly, like most history-altering events. There were no official statements, no breaking news alerts. There were only quiet, disturbing reports sent over encrypted channels from the U.S. Embassy in Havana to State Department headquarters in Washington. Diplomats, security personnel, intelligence officers, people trained to withstand immense psychological pressure, began reporting strange and debilitating symptoms. They described sudden bouts of vertigo, nausea, severe headaches, and problems with balance and hearing. Some complained of a cognitive fog, an inability to concentrate, memory lapses, difficulty finding words. The strangest and most common detail was that sound. It was always localized, directional. One person in a room could be writhing in agony while a colleague standing just a few feet away heard absolutely nothing. The sound seemed to ignore walls. It could appear in a hotel room, in an office, or even at home. It was like a ghost that selected its victims with surgical precision. The official story began to slowly take shape, forged by the system, that vast, lumbering machine of government agencies, intelligence services, and their media proxies. It was both predictable and convenient. A hostile power was to blame, specifically Russia or possibly China, using some exotic, top-secret weapon. After several years of investigation, the Central Intelligence Agency pointed with a high degree of confidence to a directed microwave or ultrasonic weapon. The theory was elegant and logical. A focused beam of energy could, in theory, induce the so-called Frey effect, where microwave pulses create the sensation of sound inside a person's head by directly affecting the auditory nerves and brain tissue. This explained both the localized nature of the attacks and the bizarre symptoms. It created an enemy that was understandable and tangible. It allowed the system to get the situation under control, at least in the information space. A global hunt for the microwave cannon began. Intelligence agencies swept embassies with radiation detectors. Counterintelligence ramped up surveillance on suspected GRU agents. The world held its breath, waiting for the smoking gun to be found. But it never was. Not a single device. Not one transmitter. Not a single trace. Nothing. And this is where the story splits into two realities. The first is the official one. In it, Havana Syndrome is an episode in a new Cold War, a series of covert attacks that eventually faded or became less intense. The second reality is the one hidden in the data, in the timeline, in coincidences that are too perfect to be random. Because while the CIA was looking for a Russian van with an antenna on the streets of Havana, Vienna, and Guangzhou, another event occurred. A quiet event, almost unnoticed against the backdrop of geopolitical intrigue. An event that happened not on Earth, but in the frozen void of space. On October 19th, 2019, the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, or ATLAS, in Hawaii, detected a faint, fast-moving object. It was given the provisional designation C-2019-U6. But it soon became clear that this was no comet. Calculations of its orbit revealed something incredible. The eccentricity of its trajectory was 3.4. Any value greater than 1 means the object does not belong to our solar system. It's a visitor, an alien from interstellar space. It was only the second such object ever detected in human history, after the mysterious Oumuamua. It was given an official name, 3I Atlas, the third interstellar object discovered by the ATLAS system. Unlike the cigar-shaped Oumuamua, which had already left our system by the time we could get a good look, ATLAS was more visible. But the more we looked at it, the more questions arose. It had no coma, the cloud of gas and dust characteristic of comets. Its spectral analysis gave no clear answers about its composition. It was dark, reflecting almost no light, and moved along its hyperbolic trajectory with a silent, mathematically precise grace. To official science, it was just another interesting rock flying by, another data point for the catalogs. But what if it wasn't? Events on Earth continued to unfold. The trickster event, as we'll call it, was gaining momentum. The geography of the attacks expanded. After Cuba, there were reports from China, then Austria, Germany, Vietnam, India, Serbia, even from Washington, D.C. itself. The picture grew more and more chaotic. There was no geopolitical logic. Why attack diplomats in Hanoi and Belgrade simultaneously? What strategic sense did it make to incapacitate a CIA agent in Moscow and a State Department employee in Berlin within the same week? This randomness was driving analysts mad. It didn't fit any model of espionage warfare. Russia, China, they all operate with a certain logic, pursuing specific goals. But this felt like noise, like white noise, in which it was impossible to isolate a signal. And that, paradoxically, was the signal. We are conditioned to look for patterns on a horizontal plane, in geography, in politics, in time. But what if we needed to lift our heads and look up? What if the map on which to plot the points was not a map of the world, but of the star-flecked sky? Let's conduct a thought experiment, one that a few independent analysts on private forums are rumored to have run using publicly available orbital data. Let's take every confirmed case of Havana Syndrome, every single point on the planet, and for each point, let's mark the exact date and time of the incident. Now let's superimpose the trajectory of Object 3I Atlas onto this three-dimensional model of spacetime. And this is where a cold dread begins to creep up your spine. At the moment of every attack, every single recorded case. In Havana in 2016. In Guangzhou in 2018. In Vienna in 2021. Every time, Object 3I Atlas was in the only possible perfect position in space. It was at the nadir, the point in the celestial sphere directly above the site of the attack. The correlation wasn't just high, it was absolute, 100%. This didn't look like a coincidence. It looked like choreography. A perfectly planned series of experiments, where cities and embassies were just points on a coordinate grid, and the lab rats were unsuspecting human beings. And here is the central question of the first act of our drama. Coincidence? Or intent? The official version claims we're dealing with a complex but entirely terrestrial intelligence operation, its geography explained by hidden motives we don't understand. This is the systems version. It's convenient. It doesn't shatter our worldview. It keeps fear within manageable bounds. It makes us look at each other with suspicion. But there is another version. Speculative. Terrifying. A version born from the cold, impartial numbers of orbital mechanics. What if the sonic attacks weren't attacks at all? What if they were a calibration, a test? The first field experiment of the most advanced non-lethal weapon in history, with a source that is not on our planet. A few hours after the first rumors of this orbital correlation began to leak online, several high-ranking officials anonymously confirmed to major news agencies that the primary line of investigation was still foreign interference, most likely Russian. They doubled down. They shone the spotlight even more intensely on the ground. But why? Why are they so desperate to make us look down when all the evidence, all the data, all the terrifying mathematical precision points up into the dark, silent void? This doesn't look like a mistake. It looks like a cover-up. And the most important question is not what they are hiding, but why. To expose a lie, you must first understand its architecture. And the lie built by the system around Havana Syndrome was a work of art. It was elegant, symmetrical, and most importantly, it rested on a solid foundation of half-truth. Let's be fair to the analysts at Langley and Fort Meade. The directed microwave weapon theory wasn't pulled out of thin air. It was the most logical, simplest, and most convenient explanation of all. Occam's razor seemed to point in this very direction. Why invent alien death rays when prototypes of similar weapons have been gathering dust in superpower arsenals for decades? The history of research into the non-lethal effects of electromagnetic fields goes deep into the Cold War. It was a kind of holy grail for intelligence agencies. A weapon capable of neutralizing, disorienting, or even driving an enemy mad without leaving any traces, no bullets, no shrapnel. The perfect tool for the quiet war waged in the shadows of embassies and residences. The centerpiece of this theory, its cornerstone, is the so-called microwave auditory effect, or the Frey effect. It's named after American neuroscientist Alan Frey, who published his revolutionary study in 1961. Frey discovered that the human brain can perceive microwave radiation as sound. It sounds like science fiction, but the physics are relatively simple. When a short, powerful pulse of microwave radiation hits the head, it causes a tiny but very rapid temperature increase in the brain tissue. We're talking about thousandths of a degree, but it's enough. This instantaneous thermal expansion creates a faint shock wave that travels through the soft tissues and bones of the skull to the inner ear, where the cochlea, our biological microphone, perceives it as a click, a buzz, or a hiss. The crucial thing to understand is that the ears are not involved in this process. The sound is born directly inside the head. This explains why victims described it as internal, and why it couldn't be recorded by ordinary microphones. Imagine the possibilities this opens up. You could transmit not just clicks into a person's head, but complex modulated signals, speech, commands, disorienting noise. You could affect the vestibular system, causing dizziness and loss of balance. You could disrupt cognitive functions, creating that very brain fog. The symptoms of Havana Syndrome fit this theory almost perfectly. It was like a puzzle where all the pieces suddenly fell into place. What's more, the system had the perfect suspect. Since the 1950s, the U.S. Embassy in Moscow had been bathed in a mysterious microwave signal, nicknamed the Moscow Signal. No one knew its purpose for sure. Was it an attempt to eavesdrop on conversations, jam American equipment, or most alarmingly, affect the health of diplomats? The Soviet Union, and later Russia, had always been pioneers in the research of so-called psychotronic weapons. This entire history, this entire background, created the perfect narrative. The Russians had simply perfected their old technology and were now deploying it in a new hybrid war. It was a story you wanted to believe. It was understandable. It was terrestrial. It left humanity as the master of its own destiny, albeit entangled in another dirty spy game. But there was one problem. A quiet, persistent, mathematical problem buried in the laws of physics. A problem that experts at the CIA and NSA couldn't have been unaware of, but which they chose to ignore when drafting their public reports. That problem is energy, and its dissipation over distance. To understand the first, deepest crack in the official version, we have to dive into some seemingly boring numbers. But that's where the devil is hiding. Any radiation, whether it's light from a bulb or a microwave beam, obeys the inverse square law. Its intensity decreases in proportion to the square of the distance from the source. Simply put, if you move twice as far from the source, the signal strength drops by a factor of 4. If you move 10 times farther away, the strength drops by a factor of 100. Now, imagine a typical urban environment where embassies are located. It's a labyrinth of concrete, steel, and glass. An attack has to be conducted from a distance, from a nearby building, from a parked van. 100, 200, maybe 500 meters, about a third of a mile. At this distance, the signal attenuation in free space is already colossal. But that's not all. The microwave beam had to penetrate not a vacuum, but material barriers. Building walls, reinforced concrete floors, bulletproof windows. Each of these barriers is a shield that absorbs and scatters a huge portion of the beam's energy. Ordinary window glass can weaken the signal several times over. A concrete wall, by tens, even hundreds of times. And embassies aren't ordinary buildings. They are fortresses designed to protect against all forms of electronic espionage. Their walls often contain special shielding materials. Their windows are coated with films that reflect electromagnetic radiation. Punching through such defenses with a directed energy beam is a non-trivial task. Calculations performed by independent physicists and engineers paint a frightening picture. To deliver enough energy into the target's brain to generate the fray effect after passing through all these obstacles, the radiation source would have to possess monstrous power. We're not talking about the kilowatts your home microwave consumes. We're talking about megawatts. To grasp the scale, imagine a small city power plant. All the energy it generates in 1 second would need to be collected and focused into a beam a few centimeters in diameter. You can't hide a device capable of that in a briefcase. You can't mount it on the roof of a van. This would be a huge, cumbersome installation with a massive power supply, and more importantly, a gigantic cooling system. Because according to the laws of thermodynamics, most of that energy would turn into heat. Such a device would glow on thermal imagers like a supernova. It would create such an electromagnetic field around it that everyone's cell phones within a block would go haywire, and cars would shut down. It would leave behind an energy signature impossible to hide. Looking for such a microwave cannon on the streets of Havana or Vienna is like looking for a nuclear submarine in a backyard pond. It simply couldn't have been there. And the fact that in all these years, security services equipped with the most advanced hardware found not a single, not even an indirect sign of such devices operating is not just an intelligence failure. It is proof. Proof that they are looking for the wrong thing in the wrong place. The official story is starting to crack at the seams. It's held together not by facts, but by the convenience of its narrative. But where do we look for an alternative? Sometimes, to find the answer to a question about the future, you have to look to the past, to dusty archives, to shelves of declassified documents. It is there, in a DARPA report from 1978, part of a long-defunct project codenamed Chimera, that we find the missing link. Project Chimera was dedicated to studying the feasibility of creating non-lethal microwave weapons, and the conclusions reached by American scientists more than 40 years ago were unequivocal. The report states in plain language that creating an effective and crucially covert ground-based weapon based on the fray effect is practically impossible due to the colossal energy requirements and the problem of penetrating obstacles. It was a dead end. But in the final appendix of the report, in a section titled Future Directions, there's a paragraph that sends a chill down your spine. The authors write, and I quote, almost verbatim, "The only theoretically feasible way to overcome the aforementioned limitations is to place the emitter in low Earth orbit. A direct line of sight to the target, minimal atmospheric attenuation, and the ability to use a high-power nuclear or solar energy source would remove virtually all technical obstacles." End quote. An orbital platform, a space-based weapon. As early as 1978, American military analysts understood what the CIA today seemingly refuses to admit: that the only way to carry out such an attack cleanly and stealthily is to strike from above, from space. And this is where it gets truly strange. This report is not classified. It's in the public domain. Any analyst investigating Havana Syndrome could have found and read it. And it's impossible to believe that there aren't people at the CIA, NSA, or DIA who are unaware of these findings. This means only one thing. Their silence is not ignorance. It is a choice. They know the ground-based version doesn't hold up to scrutiny. They know the only physically plausible explanation points to space. But they continue to stubbornly feed the public and politicians the story of Russian microwaves. Why? The problem wasn't that their model was wrong. Their model was incomplete. It deliberately ignored data that contradicted it. And that is no longer a mistake. It is the conscious construction of an informational smokescreen. It is an act of concealment. They created a convenient, understandable enemy here on Earth to distract our attention from the real source, which glides silently and dispassionately above our heads in the cold blackness of space. They didn't just fail to find the weapon. They knew from the very beginning that they were looking for it on the wrong planet. And this fact transforms the entire story from a spy thriller into something much larger and more disturbing. If they are lying to us about the source, it means they know much more about it than they are letting on. And if they are so desperate to hide its existence, it means the truth is far more terrifying than any games played by terrestrial intelligence agencies. The first crack in the official story turned out not to be just a crack. It was a gaping abyss. And peering into it, we can see the outlines of a completely different, unbelievable reality. If the first crack in the official story was a matter of physics, the second, much deeper one, was a matter of information. Or rather, its inexplicable absence. In our digital age, the absence of data is often a louder statement than its presence. An empty server, an interrupted telemetry stream, a deleted file. These are not just errors. They are ghosts. Ghosts in the machine that indicate someone very powerful doesn't want us to see something. And to find this ghost, we must travel to the very heart of modern astronomy, to its digital temple, the archive for the James Webb Space Telescope. Before we do that, it's important to understand how the world of astronomical discovery works. It's not a chaotic process where every scientist looks wherever they want and shouts, "Eureka!" It's a strictly regulated global system with the Minor Planet Center, or MPC, as its central nervous system. Imagine a giant library operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. From all corners of the globe, from Chile's Atacama Desert to the volcanic peaks of Hawaii, from automated observatories in Australia to space telescopes in orbit, a continuous stream of data flows into this library. Millions of observations of asteroids, comets, and other objects moving across our sky. The MPC collects, verifies, catalogs this data, and publishes it for the entire global scientific community. It's a triumph of collaboration. The principle of openness is the foundation upon which all modern science is built. any discovery must be verifiable. Any conclusion must be backed by raw data that any other scientist can download, analyze, and either confirm or refute. It is a sacred protocol. It is thanks to this system that we learned about 3I Atlas in the first place. It's thanks to this system that we were able to calculate its incredible interstellar orbit, and this system should have been our primary tool for studying it. When a unique visitor like 3I Atlas enters our system, it becomes target number 1. All the world's largest telescopes turn their mirrors toward it to gather as much information as possible before it disappears forever into the interstellar void. And of course, the chief among these telescopes, our new golden honeycombed eye peering into the very depths of time and space, the James Webb Space Telescope, JWST, could not stay on the sidelines. JWST is not just a telescope, it's a time machine. Its sensitivity in the infrared spectrum allows it to see the coldest, darkest, and most distant objects in the universe. It was built to see the light of the first stars, but its capabilities were also perfectly suited to studying a dark, cold, interstellar wanderer like 3I Atlas. Scientists around the world held their breath. What would Webb see? Could it determine its exact composition with its NIR-spec spectrograph? Could it make out its shape? Obtain data on its rotation? The answers to these questions could have revolutionized our understanding of what lurks in the void between the stars. And the observation took place. In early 2022, according to the official schedule published on the website of the Space Telescope Science Institute, JWST allocated several precious hours of its time to direct its gaze at 3I Atlas. The scientific community waited in anticipation. Normally, after an observation is conducted, the data undergoes initial processing and is then uploaded to the public MAST archive, the Mikulski Archive for Space Telescopes. There's a standard procedure. The team of scientists who initiated the observation has a proprietary period, usually 1 year. During this time, only they have access to the data to analyze it and publish their work first. It's a fair rule, a matter of scientific etiquette. After this period expires, the data becomes public. Anyone on the planet, from a Harvard professor to an amateur student, can download it. A year passed, then another few months. But the data for 3I Atlas never appeared in the MAST archive. This was strange. Delays happen, but such silence surrounding such an important object began to raise questions on specialized forums and mailing lists. And that's when independent researchers, the seekers we speak of, began to dig deeper. They didn't just wait. They went into the archive itself and tried to find traces of this observation. And they found them. There was a record in the MAST database. Observation ID, JWST-0178. Target, 3I Atlas. Instruments, NIR-spec, MIRI, date of observation, recorded. Everything was there, except for the data itself. Instead of a link to the files, there was a status that no one had ever seen applied to such an object before. The status read, "Data held, pending interagency review." This was not just a bureaucratic glitch. This was a red flag. A giant, billowing red flag. What is an interagency review in the context of an astronomical observation of a piece of rock flying through space? What other agencies, besides NASA and the scientific community, need to review the spectral analysis of a comet? The Department of Defense? The National Security Agency? The Central Intelligence Agency? The very phrasing was so absurd, so out of line with all protocols, that it could only mean one thing. What the James Webb saw went far beyond ordinary astronomy. It had fallen into the category of national security. Imagine a digital coffin, a huge, secure server somewhere in Maryland. Inside it lies the most valuable data on an interstellar visitor that humanity has ever obtained. But this coffin is locked, and the key is held not by scientists, but by people in dark suits whose job is not to reveal the secrets of the universe, but to manage information here on Earth. The missing file, the frozen data. This is a classic move by the system. When it encounters an anomaly, it can neither explain nor control. Its first instinct is not to investigate, but to isolate, to place the inconvenient fact in an informational quarantine, to build a wall of bureaucratic jargon, delays, and silence around it. They didn't delete the record. That would have been too crude and would have aroused even more suspicion. No, they left it in plain sight, like a tombstone on the grave of a discovery. It was as if they were telling us, yes, we looked, but what we saw is not for you. Go back to your business. Look at distant galaxies. Don't look here. But it was this very wall of silence that became the loudest piece of evidence. What if they found something and hid it from us? This question was no longer a conspiratorial speculation. It became the only logical conclusion from the situation at hand. Let's apply a speculative lens for a moment. What could JWST have seen that required the unprecedented intervention of intelligence agencies? There are several possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. First, composition. Spectral analysis is like a fingerprint for chemical elements. The NIR spec instrument could have detected elements or, more importantly, isotopic ratios in 3I atlas that do not occur in nature. Refined metals, complex carbon polymers, perhaps even elements from the part of the periodic table that so far only exists in theory. This would be direct, irrefutable proof of the object's artificial origin. Second, thermal signature. The MIRI instrument, operating in the mid-infrared range, could have detected residual heat. If 3I Atlas were just a cold rock, its temperature would match that of the surrounding space. But what if MIRI saw localized hot spots, areas that were warmer than they should have been? This could indicate the presence of an internal power source, an engine, a reactor, something that was, or had been, active very recently. And the third, most frightening possibility, modulation. What if the data showed something more than just passive observation? What if, at the moment the photons from Webb reached the object, it reacted, changed its rotation, emitted a short pulse of energy, reflected the signal in some unnatural modulated way? If that happened, 3I Atlas would cease to be just an object. It would become a subject, an intelligence. And that would mean we weren't just observing it. It would mean that it knows we are observing it. Any one of these scenarios is a bombshell capable of blowing up not only the scientific paradigm, but all global stability. Panic, religious crises, geopolitical chaos. Humanity's reaction to such a discovery is impossible to predict. And from the perspective of the system, from the perspective of those responsible for maintaining order, hiding such information is not a malicious act. It is their direct duty. They chose the lesser of two evils, a lie, to preserve peace. But the truth, like water, always finds a way. The silence was not accidental. It was the answer to what the James Webb Space Telescope saw in those few missing hours of observation. And while the system was building its digital wall, it failed to account for one thing. In a world of total connectivity, a world where gigabytes of information are sent every second, a world where every scientist has access to drafts and preliminary data, there are always leaks. Somewhere, on some local server, on the laptop of one of the research team members, a copy of the raw, unprocessed data must have remained. A fragment of the truth. And all that was needed was for someone to find the courage to pass that fragment to someone who was ready to listen. There was a twisted logic to the architecture of silence the system built around the James Webb data. They created an information vacuum, believing that truth could not arise from a void. They were wrong. Nature abhors a vacuum, And in the world of information, its place is immediately filled by the community of seekers. This is a decentralized global network of minds, unbound by orders, budgets, or political expediency. They are united by only one thing: an insatiable thirst for knowledge, and a deep, innate distrust of simple answers. They are amateur astronomers, retired military analysts, programmers, freelance physicists, connected by encrypted chats and private forums. They are the immune system of human curiosity, activating whenever the system tries to contain the infection of an anomaly. And while official science shrugged and awaited permission from the Interagency Commission, the seekers began their own parallel investigation. Their weapons were not multi-billion-dollar telescopes, but collective intelligence and thousands of small private observatories scattered across the globe. It was in this environment, this digital agora, where the boldest hypotheses collided with the most rigorous analytical calculations, that the voice of our oracle was heard. His name wasn't Cassandra or Pythia. His name was Stephen Burns, a former NSA signals intelligence analyst, a man who had spent 30 years of his life listening to the world's whispers, sifting through terabytes of ethereal noise in search of hidden patterns. He was one of those invisible soldiers of the Cold War, whose battlefield was radio frequencies and whose weapon was mathematics. But at some point, he grew tired. Tired of the lies, the secrecy, the cynicism of a world where knowledge is not light, but a weapon. He retired, took his savings, and built himself a sanctuary. Not a bunker, but an observatory. In the driest, darkest place on the planet, on the edge of Chile's Atacama Desert, where the air is so transparent it feels like you can reach out and touch the Milky Way. He traded listening to enemy transmissions for listening to the silence of space, but old habits, as they say, die hard. He searched the cosmos for the same thing he once sought on the airwaves: signals, anomalies, deviations from the norm, and Object 3I Atlas became his personal obsession. Burns didn't trust official data. He knew how easily it could be faked, filtered, or simply hidden. He only believed what he could see with his own eyes, or rather, through the lens of his custom-built 16-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope. It was no Hubble or Webb, but in skilled hands and under the perfect Atacama sky, this machine was capable of wonders. Burns wasn't interested in taking beautiful pictures of nebulae. His method was different. He was on patrol. Every clear night, and there are more than 300 of them a year in the Atacama, he would point his telescope at the patch of sky where 3I Atlas was supposed to be and simply record. Hour after hour. Terabyte after terabyte. He used an ultra-sensitive, cryogenically cooled camera to minimize digital noise and took thousands of short exposures, which his self-written algorithm then analyzed in real time. He was looking for transients, short, fleeting flashes, changes in brightness, any deviation from the predicted ephemeris. He was looking for proof that 3I Atlas was not just a dead rock. Most of the time, his screen showed only the predictable cosmic background, a scattering of distant stars, the occasional satellite track, and the stubborn, faint dot of the object itself slowly crawling across the celestial sphere. But Burns was patient. He knew that hunting for a signal was an endurance game, and he was prepared to wait. The key element of his setup was not the telescope or the camera, but a set of specialized narrowband filters. One of them was particularly exotic. It blocked out almost all visible light, allowing only radiation in a very narrow band corresponding to the wavelength of ionized helium to pass through. This was no random choice. In the cold vacuum of space, ionized helium doesn't just appear. Its creation requires energy. A lot of energy. Hard ultraviolet radiation, X-rays, streams of charged particles. Something had to knock an electron out of a helium atom. Burns reasoned that if 3I Atlas had some kind of engine or power source, it might leave a faint trail of ionized particles in its wake. And this filter was his trap, set for the most unlikely of prey. And one night, the trap sprang. It happened in 2021, but the world would learn about it much later. The algorithm on Burns's computer emitted a quiet chime, reserved for highest priority anomalies. On the screen, superimposed on the latest processed image, a thin red line appeared, pointing to an area of interest. Burns initially dismissed it. It was probably an artifact, a cosmic ray hitting the camera sensor, a single gamma-ray photon from a distant galaxy. It happens all the time. But the algorithm persisted. The anomaly was present not on one, but on 3 consecutive frames, taken 2 seconds apart. That ruled out a random cosmic ray. Burns zoomed in, his heart starting to beat faster. The dot representing 3I Atlas was in its place, faint and unremarkable. But directly along its vector of motion, in a straight line connecting the object to Earth, something incredible had manifested for a fraction of a second. It wasn't a flash. It was a glow. A faint, ghostly, linear glow, as if someone had drawn a line across the black fabric of the sky with an invisible laser, and the Earth's own atmosphere had briefly flared up in response. What did he see? Stephen Burns, thanks to his intelligence background, understood it almost immediately. He saw not a beam coming from 3I Atlas. He saw its trace in the upper layers of our own planet's atmosphere. Imagine an invisible beam of energy originating from space. It passes through the vacuum, leaving no trace. But upon entering the Earth's ionosphere, at an altitude of several hundred kilometers, or a couple hundred miles, it begins to interact with the rarefied gases, nitrogen, oxygen, and that very helium Burns's filter was tuned to. This beam, like an invisible finger, excites the atoms, causing them to fluoresce, to emit light at specific wavelengths. What Burns's camera had captured was direct visual proof of an energy beam striking from space, precisely at the point above which the observer was located. This was the impossible weapon that left no traces on the ground because its source was not on the ground. This discovery was revolutionary in itself. But Burns went further. He saved the precise timestamp of his observation, synchronized with atomic clocks. Then he went online and started searching. He searched for any reports of strange incidents that occurred on the same day and at the same hour. And he found one. In the news archives, he discovered a few short articles about a mysterious incident that occurred in Washington, D.C., near the White House. A National Security Council staffer, while in his car, experienced a sudden and severe onset of symptoms identical to Havana Syndrome. The incident was quickly classified, but initial reports had managed to leak to the press. Burns opened a planetarium program, entered the coordinates of Washington and the time of the incident. Then he checked the position of 3I Atlas at that exact moment. The object was precisely at the nadir, directly over the victim's head. And then Burns compared the times. The time his telescope in Chile recorded the glow in the atmosphere, and the time the staffer in Washington felt the impact of the invisible force. Adjusted for the speed of light, they matched, down to the millisecond. This was it, the breakthrough, the smoking gun that the CIA had never been able to find. Only it wasn't a gun. It was a glowing line in the sky pointing directly at its shooter. Burns understood what he was holding. This was not just a scientific sensation. It was a bombshell. He didn't send his data to official scientific journals. He knew it would either be buried under the pretext of needing further verification or simply ridiculed. Instead, he wrote a detailed report, attached all the raw data, calibration files, and telescope logs, and uploaded it all to that same private Seekers forum, protected by multiple layers of encryption. The community's reaction was explosive. Within hours, dozens of independent experts around the world had downloaded and verified his data. They confirmed everything. It was not an artifact. It was not a mistake. It was a real, documented event. But the most incredible discovery was yet to come. As other amateur astronomers, inspired by Burns's example, began to re-examine their own archived observations of 3I Atlas using the same methodology and digital filters, they started finding more traces. Another glow, captured from an observatory in Namibia, which perfectly matched the time of an incident at the embassy in Vienna. Another, caught from Australia, coincided with an attack in Guangzhou. The picture began to come together. It turned out that the ghostly glow captured by Burns was not just an anomaly. It was a signature, a unique energy fingerprint that appeared in the atmosphere every time the weapon fired. And this signature wasn't just a random line. Upon detailed analysis, a complex internal structure was revealed. Tiny variations in brightness that formed a repeating, non-random pattern. It looked like a barcode. A brand. The signature captured by Chris, as he was now called in the community, using his old NSA call sign, was not just proof. It was a key. The key to the language this phenomenon was speaking. And that language was only just beginning to be deciphered. Stephen Burns's discovery was not just proof. It was a key. A Rosetta Stone that allowed the silence of space to be translated into the language of visible evidence. The ghostly glow in the ionosphere, Chris's signature, became the very tool the seeker community had been lacking. Now, they no longer had to rely on rumors and indirect coincidences. They had a method, a way to track 3I Atlas's activity not by its faint reflected light, but by its direct impact on our planet. A new phase of the investigation began. It was no longer passive speculation, but an active hunt for digital ghosts. On the same secure forum where Burns had published his findings, a collaborative project was launched, unofficially named Chimera Echo, a tribute to that prophetic DARPA report from the 70s. The project's goal was ambitious, to create a global exhaustive map of all anomalous events over the past 10 years, and overlay it with a map of the signatures collected from around the world. Hundreds of independent researchers began combing through publicly available archives. Amateur astronomers re-examined their old records, running them through the algorithm that recognized Chris's signature. Programmers wrote scripts that scanned news feeds and scientific publications for keywords: unexplained glitch, anomalous phenomenon, signal of unknown origin. Geoscientists analyzed seismograph data. Satellite communication specialists studied archives of service outages. Gradually, piece by piece, a picture began to emerge on their virtual screens. A picture so vast, so complex, and so frightening in its flawless logic that it forced a re-evaluation of everything we thought we knew about Havana Syndrome. It turned out that the sonic attacks on diplomats were not the main event. They were just the tip of the iceberg, the most noticeable, the loudest, but far from the only manifestation of 3I Atlas's activity. They were a diversion, a feint that made us look at spies while the real game was unfolding in entirely different domains. The first major cascade of information came from a field that seemingly had nothing to do with it: global navigation systems. Remember? On January 23, 2016, almost a year before the first reports from Havana, a strange and still largely unexplained incident occurred. For 13 microseconds, the global GPS system failed. To a layperson, 13 microseconds is nothing, less than the blink of an eye. But for a world whose financial, transportation, and communication infrastructure is synchronized to the nanosecond, it was an eternity. For those few moments, time around the world literally went haywire. A cascading failure occurred. Thousands of cell towers across North America and Europe lost synchronization and went offline. Millions of phone calls were dropped. The entire digital radio broadcasting network in the US went down for several hours. In some power grids, automatic protection systems kicked in, causing local blackouts. The official story, released by the US Air Force, which operates the GPS system, was laughably simple: human error. Allegedly, during the decommissioning of an old satellite, incorrect time data was transmitted to the entire network. The error was quickly fixed, and the system returned to normal. Incident closed. But the seekers, as part of Project Chimera Echo, looked at this incident from a different angle. They pulled up archival data from all civilian satellite tracking stations, and they discovered something the Air Force had conveniently omitted. The failure was real, but it didn't affect the entire GPS constellation, as it should have if it were a software error. It was strictly localized. Only the satellites that were, at that moment, over a specific region, the Pacific Ocean, at a point equidistant from Hawaii, Japan, and Australia, failed. It didn't look like a glitch. It looked like a localized blinding, as if an invisible curtain had, for 13 microseconds, blocked the satellite's view of Earth. Then the researchers did what had become their standard procedure. They checked the position of 3i Atlas. At that very moment, to the very second, the interstellar object was in the perfect position for its hypothetical beam to pass directly through this blind spot. And then they searched for Chris's signature in astronomers' archives. And they found it. A small private observatory on the island of Tasmania, testing new equipment, had accidentally recorded a brief, faint fluorescence in the upper atmosphere, perfectly matching in time and direction. Coincidence? Or choreography? What if this wasn't an error, but the first test of another aspect of the weapon? A test of its ability not only to affect biological targets, but also to blind enemy technology, creating a perfect blind spot for future operations? The second cascade came from the world of high-stakes politics and science. In 2018, right in the midst of reports about Havana Syndrome in China, a quiet event, almost unnoticed by the press, took place. The International Academy of Astronautics, an organization that has been developing first contact protocols for over half a century, suddenly and without wide discussion, updated its primary document, the Declaration of Principles Concerning Activities Following the Detection of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. The old version, adopted during the Cold War, was full of optimism and called for maximum openness. It stated that any evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence should be immediately verified and, if confirmed, made public. The new version, or rather, the addendum to it, sounded completely different. It was a dry, bureaucratic document, written in the language of lawyers and military men. A new clause appeared, stating that prior to making a public announcement of the detection of a signal or other evidence, a thorough assessment of the potential risks to national and international security should be conducted. In essence, it was the legalization of a cover-up. The scientific community was being told, if you find something, don't tell the world first. Tell us, and we will decide what to do with that information. Why was this update needed now, after decades of silence? Officially, it was explained as a need to bring the protocols in line with modern realities. But the seekers saw it as a direct reaction to events that were already unfolding in secret. They saw it as an attempt by the system to retroactively legitimize what they had already done with the James Webb data. It was the architecture of silence being elevated to the level of international law. And again, a check of the Chimera Echo database yielded a shocking result. A week before this new protocol was quietly ratified in a closed-door meeting, several observatories in South Africa recorded one of the brightest and longest-lasting Chris's signatures ever observed. And this time, it wasn't aimed at an embassy. The beam struck a point in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, where at that moment there was nothing. except for several submarine internet cables connecting Europe and America. That day, unexplained anomalies in data transmission were recorded in their operation. What was this? Another test? A check of its ability to affect global information infrastructure? Or was it a signal? A warning sent to those in the know, right before they tried to legislate silence? These disparate events, attacks on people, the blinding of satellites, mysterious signals aimed at key infrastructure, began to form a single, frightening timeline. This was not a series of random incidents. It was a methodical, systematic campaign. A campaign to study our civilization, its biology, its technology, its reaction to stress. But something was missing. The historical context was missing. It all seemed too new, too sudden. And then one of the seekers, a specialist in celestial mechanics, decided to do what official science considered pointless. He decided to look into 3I Atlas's past, not just years, but millennia. He ran its orbital data through the most powerful computer simulator, reversing time. He traced its path through interstellar space, accounting for the gravitational influence of all known stars. He wanted to know where this visitor came from, and when the calculation was complete, the result sent a shudder through the entire community. The trajectory of 3I Atlas, traced back millions of years into the past, did not lead to some random point in the sky. It led with mathematical precision to a small patch of the constellation Sagittarius, to the very same region from which, on August 15th, 1977, the famous "wow" signal had come, an artifact from the past, the most famous and most mysterious anomaly in the entire history of the SETI program. 72 seconds of an incredibly powerful, narrow-band radio signal that was never repeated. Its characteristics were so close to what we would expect from an artificial source that astronomer Jerry Amon, who discovered it on a printout, circled it in red pen and wrote that one word in the margin. Wow! For decades, scientists tried to find a natural explanation for it, and for decades, they failed. And now, before them was an almost unbelievable, yet mathematically flawless connection. What if the "wow" signal was an announcement, a greeting, an informational beacon that said, "We're coming. See you in 40 years. And 3I Atlas is the ship itself, or the probe, the messenger arriving precisely on schedule. This was no longer just a coincidence. This was a story spanning decades, a story we had missed because we were looking in the wrong place and in the wrong way. And so, when all these threads, Havana Syndrome, the GPS glitch, the updated SETI protocols, and the "wow" signal were woven into a single tight knot, a central element emerged in this complex picture, the very knot that tied everything together. Project Chimera Echo discovered that all these disparate reactions from the system, hiding the web data, the deceptive explanation for the GPS failure, the protocol update, were not overseen by NASA, the Pentagon, or the CIA. They were coordinated by one structure almost unknown to the general public. All threads led to one place, to a quiet, respectable office in Vienna. Not to NASA, not to the White House, but to the Special Subcommittee on Unforeseen Contact Scenarios of the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, a subcommittee that was secretly formed in late 2015, months before the first incidents in Havana. And it was composed not of bearded astronomers and dreamy philosophers. It was composed of active and retired heads of military intelligence from the Big Five nations, and they were the ones conducting this global orchestra of silence. And the main question was no longer what was happening, but what they were all preparing us for in this deafening silence. Cui bono? Who benefits? This ancient Roman question is the scalpel used to dissect any conspiracy, any cover-up. When the system lies, it doesn't do it for the love of the art. A lie is a tool. It always has a purpose, always a beneficiary. And to understand the motives of the Vienna Subcommittee, this shadow government conducting the global silence, we need to turn away from the stars for a moment and dive into the cold, murky waters of human psychology, geopolitics, and institutional paranoia. Why are they hiding the truth about Three-Eye Atlas? The answer seems obvious: to prevent panic. But that's only the thinnest, outermost layer of the onion. The real reasons are much deeper, more complex, and more cynical. They are rooted in a fundamental fear that haunts every power structure: the fear of losing control. Let's conduct a thought experiment. Imagine that tomorrow morning the UN Secretary General steps up to the podium and announces the truth to the world. Not speculation, but a proven fact. An interstellar probe of artificial origin is above us. It possesses a directed energy technology, which it is using to study our planet. We do not know its intentions. We cannot communicate with it. We cannot counter it. What happens in the next minute, the next hour, the next day? The first thing to collapse would be the global economy. Stock markets wouldn't just fall, they would evaporate. In an instant, trillions of dollars based on the belief in a predictable future would turn to nothing. People would rush to withdraw cash that simply doesn't exist in the banks. A global financial system collapse would begin, compared to which the Great Depression would seem like a mild inconvenience. This is the first, most obvious, and most powerful motive for a cover-up. Any government in the world exists only as long as it can guarantee its citizens at least the illusion of stability. Revealing the truth about Three-Eye Atlas would shatter that illusion forever. The second level is social and psychological chaos. All the world's religions, all philosophical systems, all ideologies that underpin human society are built on one fundamental assumption: anthropocentrism. The idea that we, humans, are the pinnacle of creation, the central drama of the universe. The confirmation of another, more advanced intelligence is not just a scientific discovery. It's an existential bomb. It would blow up the foundations of all world religions. Who are the chosen people now? Whose holy texts will turn out to be true? Millions of new cults would spring up worshipping the celestial visitors. Religious wars of unprecedented scale would begin. At the same time, the authority of secular power would collapse. Why listen to a president or prime minister when a power hangs overhead that can switch off a continent with the flick of an invisible switch? The entire structure of human hierarchy, built over millennia, would crumble to dust. An era of new prophets, fanatics, and madmen would dawn. It would not just be panic. It would be civilizational collapse. And finally, the third level, the most important one for the people in the Vienna Subcommittee, is geopolitical. This is the level at which they are accustomed to thinking and acting. Imagine an arms race. Now imagine that at the finish line of this race is not a new atomic bomb or a hypersonic missile, but a technology capable of rewriting the laws of physics. What if one country, the US, China, Russia, could be the first not just to understand the principle behind Three-Eye Atlas's weapon, but to replicate it? This would not just mean a military advantage. It would mean the end of history. The nation that acquired such technology would become the absolute, undisputed hegemon. It could disable enemy satellites with impunity, paralyze its economy, influence its leaders without firing a single shot. It would be absolute power. And for the chance to be the first to obtain it, any of these countries would do anything. Tell any lie. Engage in any cover-up. The truth about Three-Eye Atlas is not just knowledge. It is the most valuable strategic resource in human history. And whoever controls the information about it controls the future. Therefore, a cover-up is not just possible. From the perspective of the system, from the perspective of its self-preservation instinct, It is the only possible, the only logical solution. This isn't a conspiracy of evil men in a dark room. It is the cold, rational calculation of an impersonal mechanism of power trying to manage a situation that has spiraled out of all control. And to understand how deeply this instinct for concealment is rooted in the psychology of power, we don't need to invent fantastic scenarios. We only need to look at our own, very real history. Remember Project MKUltra. For decades, the CIA conducted secret, illegal, and monstrously unethical experiments on its own citizens, trying to find ways to control the mind. They used LSD, hypnosis, psychological torture. When the truth began to leak out, what did the agency do? It did not repent. It destroyed almost all the documents. It burned the archives. It did everything to ensure the truth could never be proven. Because for the system, admitting a mistake is worse than the mistake itself. Or recall the Gulf of Tonkin incident. The Johnson administration deliberately lied to the American people in Congress about an attack by North Vietnamese patrol boats on a U.S. destroyer to get a pretext for a full-scale invasion of Vietnam. It was a lie that cost millions of lives. But from the geopolitical logic of the time, it was necessary to contain communism. These historical examples are not just analogies. They are proof that the system is capable of lies on any scale if its interests are at stake. And what interests could be higher than first contact with an extraterrestrial civilization and access to its technology? Now let's return to the Vienna Subcommittee and its actions. Their strategy becomes crystal clear. They are playing a complex multi-level game. The first level is complete denial and the creation of a smokescreen. This is the Russian microwave story. It perfectly solves several problems at once. First, it provides a simple, terrestrial, and understandable explanation that reassures the general public and doesn't require a worldview overhaul. Second, it sends the resources and attention of competing intelligence agencies down a false trail. While the GRU and MSS are looking for mythical American ray guns, and the CIA and MI6 are looking for Russian ones, the real players are buying precious time. It is a classic disinformation operation, played out on a global scale. The second level is the quiet, behind-the-scenes consolidation of control over information. This is the updating of SETI protocols and the freezing of the James Webb data. They are slowly, but surely, taking the keys to cosmic truth out of the hands of scientists and placing them into the hands of the military and intelligence communities. They are creating the legal and technical infrastructure for total control over any future discoveries. They are preparing for the fact that sooner or later, the truth will come out, and by that time, they want to be the only ones with the authority to interpret it. And the third, most secret and most important level is the attempt to hack the 3-Eye Atlas technology itself. We can be sure that somewhere in secret laboratories under the Nevada desert, in the Siberian taiga, or on islands in the South China Sea, the best minds of humanity are working on this problem right now. They are analyzing Chris's signature, trying to understand the physics of the beam. They are building mathematical models, trying to decipher the patterns in its activity. They are launching secret spy satellites that are trying to get as close as possible to 3-Eye Atlas to intercept any, even the faintest, leakage of energy or information. This is a new, secret space race, and its prize is not a flag on the moon, but the keys to the future. But here is where a disturbing thought appears in this seemingly flawless logic of concealment. What if the system, in its infinite self-confidence, is making one fatal mistake? They assume that 3-Eye Atlas is a passive object of study, a technology that can be dissected, understood, and copied. They are behaving like colonizers who have found a strange but very valuable artifact on the shore. But what if it's not an artifact? What if it's a scout? What if everything that is happening is not just a series of our reactions to its actions, but a dialogue in which we are speaking our lines without even realizing it? What if our attempts to hide the truth, our lies, our paranoia, are the very information it came for? It's not studying our physics or biology. It's studying our psychology, our capacity for deception, our reaction to the unknowable. If this is true, then the cover-up is not just an immoral or cynical act. It is a strategic miscalculation of colossal proportions. They weren't hiding the truth to protect us from panic. They were hiding it to buy time. Time to prepare a response that they will never tell us about. But what if this very act of concealment, this very demonstration of fear and distrust, is our response? A response that has already been received, analyzed, and sent back to wherever this silent visitor came from. And perhaps it didn't like that response at all. We think we are players in this game. But what if we are merely pieces on the board, and our first move, made in secret from everyone, has already determined the outcome of the entire game? Now that we have dissected the system's motives and seen the architecture of its lies, it is time to return to the source, to the unidentified object itself. Let's forget about geopolitics, spy games, and stock market panics for a moment. Let's look at 3i Atlas as an impartial engineer or physicist would. Let's strip it of the layers of mythology and fear and try to conduct a detailed anatomical analysis based only on the few scraps of data we have. Because it is in its physical properties, in its behavior, in its trajectory, that the most irrefutable evidence lies that this is not just an interstellar rock. It is a machine. The first thing that catches any astronomer's eye is its orbit. Yes, we know it's hyperbolic, which points to its interstellar origin. But the devil, as always, is in the details, specifically in a parameter called non-gravitational acceleration. Most comets exhibit this phenomenon as they approach the sun. Under the influence of solar heat, the ice on their surface begins to sublimate, turning into gas. These jets of gas, erupting from the surface, act like tiny rocket engines, gently pushing the comet and altering its trajectory. This is a well-understood and thoroughly studied process. Scientists can even predict the magnitude of this acceleration based on the comet's size, its distance from the sun, and the composition of its ice. And 3i Atlas also exhibited non-gravitational acceleration. But it was strange. It was too strong. Much stronger than one would expect from an object of its size, which, moreover, showed no visible coma, meaning no visible gas jets. But that wasn't even the strangest part. The strangest part was how this acceleration changed over time. For ordinary comets, it increases smoothly as they approach the sun and decreases just as smoothly as they move away. It's a predictable, analog process. With 3i Atlas, it was completely different. Its acceleration was impulsive. It switched on and off. Observations showed that the object could travel for weeks on a perfectly predictable gravitational trajectory, and then, over a period of a few hours, suddenly receive a small but clearly measurable kick that slightly corrected its course. This didn't look like the chaotic boiling of ice, but like the work of maneuvering thrusters, a series of short, precise impulses timed and vectored with precision. Official science tried to explain this with anomalous sublimation, or disintegration into unseen fragments. But these explanations sounded like incantations meant to hide the main point. The object's behavior did not fit within the framework of natural processes. It showed signs of being controlled. Second is its spectral analysis. The little that was obtained by ground-based telescopes before the system classified the Webb data was already extremely unusual. The spectrum of 3i Atlas was almost perfectly flat and featureless in the visible range, with a slight reddish tint. It had no clear absorption lines that would indicate the presence of silicates, carbon, or water ice, the standard building blocks for asteroids and comets. It looked like nothing, like a material that absorbs almost all light that falls on it, without revealing its composition. This property is called low albedo, and 3I Atlas's was extremely low. It was darker than coal, darker than the blackest asphalt. It was almost a perfect black body. Such materials are extremely rare in nature, but they are highly valued in one specific area of human activity: stealth technology. Coatings that absorb radio waves and light are used to make aircraft and ships invisible to radar and optical systems. What if the dark color of 3I Atlas is not a quirk of nature, but the result of an engineering decision? What if this is not just a rock, but an object deliberately designed to be as inconspicuous as possible? Third, and most importantly, are its estimated density and shape. We cannot see the shape of 3I Atlas directly. It is too far away and too small, but we can infer it indirectly from its light curves. By analyzing how its brightness changes over time, scientists can draw conclusions about how it rotates and how much its shape deviates from a perfect sphere. And the light curves of 3I Atlas were incredibly stable. They hardly changed. This suggests one of two things. Either it has an almost perfect spherical shape, which is extremely unlikely for a natural object of its size, or it does not rotate chaotically at all, but is in a state of gravitational stabilization, or, even more likely, active attitude stabilization. Simply put, it always keeps the same side facing the observer, like a satellite whose antenna always points toward Earth. But the most astonishing discovery was made when astronomers tried to estimate its mass. Knowing its size, from its brightness, and its non-gravitational acceleration, a rough calculation of its density could be made. And the numbers that resulted were off the charts. For a faint, invisible outgassing to affect the object's trajectory so strongly, it had to be incredibly light. Its density had to be less than that of water, less than cork. It had to be almost hollow. This was so absurd that one of the leading astrophysicists, Avi Loeb of Harvard, the same one who actively studied the first interstellar object, Oumuamua, put forward a bold hypothesis. He suggested that we are dealing not with a massive object, but with something entirely different: a solar sail. A vast, wafer-thin, lightweight membrane being pushed forward by the pressure of sunlight. This would elegantly explain both the non-gravitational acceleration and the low density. But it would also mean that the object is 100% artificial. Now let's put all these clues together. Impulsive, controlled acceleration. A light-absorbing coating like that on a stealth aircraft. Stable orientation in space. And an incredibly low density, indicating either a hollow structure or an exotic technology like a solar sail. Each of these anomalies, taken separately, could be written off as an observational error or a unique confluence of circumstances. But altogether, they form a single, consistent, and frightening portrait. This is not a comet. This is not an asteroid. This is an interstellar probe. An automated and possibly manned craft that has arrived in our system with a specific mission. And if that is the case, then its weapon, that energy beam, ceases to be just a hypothesis. It becomes a logical, expected component of its design. It is its primary instrument, its scanner, its manipulator, its means of communication. And here we come to the strangest, most inexplicable detail, which hints at its true, perhaps horrifying purpose. Let's recall the map of its attacks, compiled by Project Chimera Echo. First, it was people, then satellites, then undersea cables. It seems like a chaotic set of targets. But if you look at them not in terms of what the targets are, but where they are located, a shocking pattern emerges. All the targets, whether it was the embassy in Vienna, a GPS satellite over the Pacific, or a cable on the Atlantic floor, had one thing in common. They were located at points with an anomalously high intensity of Earth's geomagnetic field. In the so-called nodes of the Hartmann net or Curie lines, concepts that official science considers pseudoscience, but which are actively used in some classified military research. What if 3I Atlas isn't targeting people or technology? What if that's just collateral damage? What if its real target is the planet itself, its energy system, its nerve nodes? Imagine a doctor who, before beginning surgery, checks the patient's pulse at various points. What if these attacks are a form of planetary acupuncture? A series of energy injections into key points to see how the entire system reacts. It's not just scanning us. It's interacting with us on a level we are only just beginning to vaguely comprehend. It's not studying our civilization. It's studying our world as a single, living organism. And this is where the hypothesis becomes truly alarming. After 3I Atlas passed perihelion, the closest point in its orbit to the Sun, and received a gravitational boost, its trajectory changed. And a new calculation, made by the seekers based on the latest observations, showed something incredible. Its new trajectory was not leading it out of the solar system, as it should have been. It had been adjusted to make a close flyby of Earth in a few years. Very close. Much closer than the Moon. This did not look like an accident. It looked like the final phase of a mission. First, long-range scanning. Then, a close approach for detailed study. Or for something else. And the strangest question was not why it is coming toward us, but what it plans to do when it gets here. Because a probe capable of delivering pinpoint energy strikes from hundreds of millions of kilometers away will become something far more powerful upon close approach to its target. It will cease to be just a scanner. It will become an instrument. An instrument whose true purpose we may soon find out. And we probably won't like it. And it is here, at this point in our investigation, when all the threads seem to have woven into a single, tight, consistent knot, when the portrait of an interstellar probe methodically studying our planet seems almost photographically clear, it is at this very moment that we must stop. We must take a deep breath and deliberately swing the pendulum of plausibility in the opposite direction. Because the greatest trap for any seeker of truth is to fall in love with their own theory, to see order in chaos simply because our brains desperately crave that order. This cognitive bias is called apophenia, and we must give the floor to those who consider everything we have discussed so far to be exactly that, a grand, captivating, but ultimately apophenic illusion. Let's don the skeptic's robes and try, with cold, merciless logic, to demolish the beautiful edifice we have just constructed. Let's start with the very foundation, the correlation between the Havana Syndrome attacks and the position of 3I Atlas. Yes, at first glance, it seems 100%. Perfect. But is it really? Let's listen to what a hypothetical Dr. Emily Carter, a fictional but archetypal representative of mainstream science, an astrophysicist from Caltech specializing in the dynamics of small solar system bodies, would say. She wouldn't shout, "You're lying!" She would calmly, methodically, with figures in hand, begin to dismantle our theory piece by piece. First, she would point to a sampling bias. "You are only taking the confirmed cases," she would say, "the ones that leaked to the press. But how many false alarms were there? How many diplomats felt unwell due to stress, a tropical illness, or simply the mojito they had the night before? You don't know. Official health services investigated hundreds of such complaints, and only in a few dozen cases could they not find a prosaic medical explanation. You have selected from a huge array of noise only the points that perfectly fit your curve. This is not the scientific method. This is cherry-picking the data to fit a desired result. Second, she would draw our attention to the very concept of a perfect position. What do you mean by nadir? She would ask. The exact position of an object in the celestial sphere is calculated with a certain margin of error. The Havana Syndrome incidents themselves did not happen in a single second. They lasted from several minutes to half an hour. During that time, the Earth rotates. The object moves. You have a window of tens of minutes and an area in the sky of several angular degrees into which you are trying to fit your event. With enough random events on Earth and a constantly moving object in the sky, you're bound to find a few random coincidences. It's simply the law of large numbers. Correlation, as we know, does not imply causation. She would cite the classic example, the correlation between ice cream sales and drownings. They correlate perfectly, but not because ice cream causes drowning, but because both are caused by a third factor, hot weather. What is the third factor here? She would continue. Perhaps there isn't one. Perhaps it's just a statistical artifact that your brain, wired to find conspiracies, perceives as a pattern. Now let's move on to the object itself. Non-gravitational acceleration? Yes, it's unusual, Dr. Carter would agree, but not unprecedented. We still don't fully understand all the mechanisms of cometary outgassing. Perhaps 3I Atlas has a unique composition where sublimation occurs with gases invisible to us, like hydrogen or nitrogen. Perhaps its nucleus has a complex asymmetrical shape that causes jets to erupt in very narrow, focused beams that are hard to spot. We are observing only the second interstellar visitor. We have too little data to say what's normal and what's anomalous. To call these engines is not science, it's anthropomorphism. We are ascribing human motives to a rock. A dark surface? Low albedo? That is actually very typical for many comets and asteroids, she would parry. Prolonged exposure to cosmic rays in interstellar space creates a dark, reddish crust of organic compounds called tholins on the surface. That is precisely what we see in the spectrum. It's not a stealth coating. It's a cosmic tan. The absence of clear absorption lines only indicates that the surface is covered by this uniform crust, which masks the composition of the nucleus. Low density? Avi Loeb's solar sail hypothesis? Here, Dr. Carter would sigh and pinch the bridge of her nose. Professor Loeb is a brilliant theorist, but sometimes he gets carried away. His hypothesis is elegant, but it creates more problems than it solves. For a sail of that size to withstand the stresses of a stellar flyby, it would have to be made of a material with utterly fantastic properties. A much simpler, albeit more boring, explanation is that we are dealing not with a monolithic object, but with a rubble pile, a loose conglomerate of dust and ice, weakly held together by gravity. Such objects can have a very low average density. And finally, our seemingly strongest card, Chris's signature, the glow in the ionosphere. This is the most interesting observation, she would admit, and it certainly deserves study. But to conclude from it the existence of a beam weapon is a giant leap for which there is no basis. There are many known phenomena capable of causing a glow in the upper atmosphere. They could be high-altitude lightning, sprites. It could be the atmospheric entry of a micrometeoroid that was traveling on the same trajectory as 3I Atlas. It could be a local fluctuation in the solar wind, focused by the Earth's magnetosphere. Yes, the timing coincidence with the incident in Washington is intriguing. But one case is an anecdote, not statistics. Before building theories about interstellar wars, we must rule out all, absolutely all, possible terrestrial and near-Earth explanations. And so, step by step, methodically and coolly, the skeptic can deconstruct our theory. And we must admit, there is an iron logic to her arguments. Perhaps we have indeed fallen victim to apophenia. Perhaps this is just a chain of incredible yet still random coincidences. A comet with unusual properties, a series of mysterious but entirely terrestrial attacks, and our desperate human brain, which connected these two unrelated stories into one thrilling epic. It would seem simple. An ordinary comet. Unusual coincidences. Case closed. But there was something else. One detail. One fact that no skeptic, including our imaginary Dr. Carter, has ever been able to explain coherently. This fact was not hidden in secret archives. It was published in the open, in one of the most reputable scientific journals, Nature Astronomy. It was an article dedicated to analyzing the trajectory of 3I Atlas, and in it, among dozens of pages of formulas and graphs, was one small but stunning conclusion. The authors of the article discovered that the pulses of non-gravitational acceleration, those kicks the object received, were not random. They occurred with a certain periodicity, but this periodicity was not temporal. It was spatial. The object received a pulse of acceleration every time its trajectory crossed the ecliptic plane, the plane in which all the planets of the solar system orbit. Imagine an invisible sheet of glass passing through the center of the sun, on which Earth, Mars, Jupiter, and all the others roll like marbles. And here, our interstellar guest, moving along its inclined orbit, pierces this sheet from top to bottom, and at that very moment, its engines fire. Then it flies on, below this sheet, and when it crosses it again, this time from bottom to top, the engines fire again. This was so strange, so absurd from the point of view of any known cometary physics, that the authors of the article themselves did not know how to interpret it. They honestly wrote in their conclusions, "The mechanism causing this behavior remains unknown." They could not find a single natural process that would be tied to the geometry of the solar system, rather than to the distance from the sun. Sublimation depends on heat. Tidal forces depend on the gravity of planets. But what on earth could depend on crossing an imaginary plane in empty space? This no longer looked like a coincidence. This was navigation. It was like the behavior of a submarine that, moving through the water, periodically rises to periscope depth to get its bearings, determine its position relative to the surface, and correct its course. What if 3I Atlas was doing the same thing? What if the ecliptic plane, where all the main mass and the entire electromagnetic field of the solar system are concentrated, was a kind of navigational beacon for it? It used it as a reference point for its maneuvering impulses. This was proof of intelligent, purposeful behavior that could no longer be written off as anomalous outgassing. This single, confirmed, and peer-reviewed fact, which skeptics preferred to tactfully sidestep, shattered their neat picture of the world. It swung the pendulum back in our direction, and it forced us to ask the next, even more disturbing question. If it navigates our system with such precision, it must have a map. And if it has a map, it means this isn't its first time here. The fact of 3I Atlas's navigational lock on the ecliptic plane became the irrefutable proof that moved our investigation from the realm of speculation into the realm of alarming reality. It was no longer a matter of belief. It was a matter of interpreting a proven fact. And this fact opened up a completely new, dizzying horizon for thought. We are used to thinking of space and technology as two different domains. Space is nature, the elements, the laws of physics. Technology is what we humans create here on Earth to understand and subdue that nature. But what if this boundary is just an illusion? What if the universe itself, at a certain level, is a technology, and we, with our microchips and neural networks, are just reinventing the wheel? To understand what we might be facing, we need to broaden the context of our investigation. We need to look at the most advanced, most fantastical-seeming technologies being born in terrestrial laboratories right now and ask ourselves, if we can think of it, why can't they build it? Let's start with the simplest and most obvious. The weapon, the directed energy beam. For us, it still sounds like a prop from Star Wars. But is it really? Consider Elon Musk's Starlink project. Thousands of satellites in low Earth orbit that already cover the entire planet with a global internet access network. Each of these satellites is, in essence, a highly complex transceiver with a phased array antenna. This technology allows for the formation and control of a radio beam with incredible precision, directing it to a tiny antenna on the ground. Today, this beam carries information. But what's stopping us from loading it not with gigabytes of data, but with gigawatts of energy tomorrow? Technically, almost nothing. The problem, as we've discussed, is the power source. But even that problem is being solved. In recent years, there has been a quiet breakthrough in space-based energy. Projects to create orbital solar power stations, which seemed like a utopia just a decade ago, are now receiving multi-billion-dollar funding from the governments of the US, China, and the European Union. The idea is simple. Huge panels in space collect solar energy 24 hours a day, without atmospheric loss, and transmit it to Earth as a focused microwave beam. Officially, for peaceful purposes, for clean energy. But any technology is dual use, and a system capable of transmitting enough energy to power an entire city is also capable of concentrating that energy at a single point, turning it into the perfect orbital weapon. We ourselves, right now, are building a prototype of the very machine whose existence we so desperately deny. But let's go even further. What if the beam from 3i Atlas is not just a crude microwave oven? What if it operates on entirely different physical principles? In recent years, research into so-called twisted or vortex light beams has come to the forefront of fundamental physics. These are light beams that carry not only energy, but also orbital angular momentum. They propagate through space, twisting in a spiral like a corkscrew. And these beams have astonishing properties. They can transfer rotational momentum to microscopic objects, acting as optical tweezers. They can carry far more information than conventional radio waves. And some theorists suggest that a sufficiently powerful and properly modulated twisted beam could interact not only with matter, but with the very fabric of space-time, creating local gravitational anomalies. Doesn't that sound like the symptoms of Havana Syndrome? The feeling that the room is tilting, that the floor is dropping out from under you? What if the victims were experiencing not just the heating of brain tissue, but a local, microscopic distortion of the gravitational field inside their skulls? It sounds insane. But just 20 years ago, the idea that we could edit DNA using a protein borrowed from bacteria, CRISPR technology, would also have sounded insane. The line between science fiction and reality is not a wall, but a constantly shifting horizon. Now let's look at navigation. We were astonished that 3i Atlas orients itself using the ecliptic plane. But how does it do it? How does it feel this imaginary line in empty space? Perhaps the answer lies in the field of quantum technologies. Right now, in labs on Earth, the first prototypes of quantum compasses and gravimeters are being built and tested. These are devices that use ultra-sensitive atomic interferometers that can measure the slightest changes in gravitational and electromagnetic fields with an accuracy unattainable by any other instrument. Such a device aboard 3i Atlas could see the gravitational field of the solar system not as a simple attraction to the sun, but as a highly complex, three-dimensional terrain in which the ecliptic plane, where the mass of all planets is concentrated, is a pronounced feature, a ridge. For it, this plane is not imaginary. It is as real as a mountain range to a climber. It is not just flying through a void. It is sailing on the currents of a gravitational ocean, and the ecliptic plane is its Gulf Stream, its main landmark. We are only just learning to create such sensors. What if, For a civilization capable of interstellar travel, this is as basic a technology as a magnetic compass is for us. This technological context forces us to ask the most important question. If we, a civilization that only 100 years ago learned to fly in machines heavier than air, are already on the verge of creating all these technologies, orbital beam weapons, quantum navigation systems, gravity manipulation, then what is a civilization capable of that is 1,000 years ahead of us in development? 1,000,000? 1,000,000,000? We are trying to understand their technology based on our physics, our understanding of the universe. But what if their technology is based on physics we haven't discovered yet? What if they have learned to control not just energy, but information at the most fundamental quantum level? Consider the concept known as the computational universe, or the simulation hypothesis. The idea that our reality is not a physical world, but a giant information system operating according to certain rules, or code. Most people treat this as a philosophical toy. But what if it's a working engineering principle? What if an advanced civilization has learned not just to observe this system, but to hack its code, to make changes to it, to create glitches in the matrix? What if the 3-eye Atlas beam is not a stream of energy, but a stream of information? Information that rewrites the local laws of physics for a very short time, causing not heating, but a glitch in the program responsible for neuron interaction, creating not an electromagnetic pulse, but a 404 error in the operation of a GPS satellite. This would explain why we can't find any traces of its weapon, because it doesn't leave physical traces. It only leaves informational ones. Like a hacker who breached a system and then erased all the logs. This thought takes us to a whole new level of paranoia. We are learning to create artificial realities in computers. We are building metaverses. We are creating synthetic heavens, photorealistic simulations of the starry sky used in military pilot trainers. We can already create an illusion on a screen that is indistinguishable from reality. But what if someone has long been using these technologies against us? Not on a screen, but in reality itself. What if 3-eye Atlas is not just a probe? What if it's a projector, an instrument capable of creating local, controllable illusions? What if its dark surface is not a stealth coating, but a kind of screen, capable of mimicking the surrounding background or, conversely, projecting a desired image? It sounds like madness. But remember the latest advances in metamaterials, artificial structures that can manipulate light in ways impossible in nature. The first prototypes of invisibility cloaks have already been created. What's to stop the creation of a projector cloak? We are on the threshold of an era where the line between the real and the virtual, between the physical and the informational, will begin to blur. And the mystery of 3-eye Atlas may be the first signal that we are not alone in this new era, that there are players who have mastered these rules much better than we have. And this leads us to the most disturbing conclusion. If they can control information as easily as we control electricity, then we cannot trust anything. Not our eyes, not our instruments. Any observation, any signal could be a fake, an illusion, part of a grand spectacle whose purpose is unknown to us. We may not just be lab mice in this experiment. We may be characters in someone else's video game who have suddenly begun to suspect the existence of the player, and it seems that player has noticed us looking back. And now, he's coming for us. Not to talk, but perhaps to reboot the system. The technological horizon that the mystery of 3-eye Atlas leads us to is staggering. It makes us feel like Neanderthals seeing a lighter for the first time. We see the flame. We feel the heat. But the magic contained in the small metal box is beyond our comprehension. But technologies are just tools. The deepest, most existential questions lie not in how they do it, But why? What does it mean for humanity to realize that we are not alone in the universe? What does it mean to understand that we have possibly been observed for a very long time? And what does it mean to encounter an intelligence so far superior to us that we are, to it, nothing more than an interesting form of mold on a rock orbiting an unremarkable star? To try to grasp this, we must plunge into a philosophical abyss, into a space where science falls silent and existential dread begins to speak. Throughout our entire history, we have lived in the cozy cradle of solitude. Yes, we looked at the stars and dreamed of other worlds, but deep down, we were always certain of our uniqueness. We are the sole bearers of consciousness, the only witnesses to existence. This certainty, conscious or not, has been the foundation of our entire culture, all our pride. And now, that cradle is beginning to crack, and the first, most deafening sound we hear is the great silence, the Fermi paradox. If the universe is teeming with life, then where is everybody? Why don't we see megastructures, hear radio broadcasts, find traces of alien activity? For decades, we've sought an answer to this question. We have come up with dozens of hypotheses, from the most optimistic to the most grim. Maybe we're not looking the right way. Maybe they communicate in ways we cannot comprehend. Maybe we live in a galactic zoo, and they deliberately hide themselves so as not to interfere with our development. But there is another, much darker hypothesis. The hypothesis known as the dark forest. It was formulated by the Chinese science fiction writer Cixin Liu, but its roots go deep into game theory and evolutionary biology. It states that the universe is a dark forest, full of hiding hunters. Life seeks to survive. Resources are limited, and the interstellar distances make meaningful communication and the establishment of trust impossible. Any civilization that carelessly reveals its location risks being immediately destroyed by another, more advanced civilization, not out of malice, but out of simple, cold calculation. Because it's impossible to predict whether this new neighbor will become a threat in the future. Therefore, the safest strategy is a preemptive strike. In this scenario, the great silence is not the absence of life. It is the deafening chorus of those who have learned to be silent. It is the silence of a graveyard, a courtesy the living pay the dead. And into this dark forest, we burst, noisy, naive, shouting our existence on all frequencies. We send messages into space full of information about our biology, culture, and location. We broadcast our television shows and radar signals in all directions. From the perspective of the dark forest hypothesis, we are behaving like a lost child in the woods, shouting hello, not knowing who might answer the call, a rescuer or a wolf. And the mystery of Three-Eye Atlas, viewed through this lens, takes on a completely new, sinister meaning. What if it's not a research probe? What if it's a hunter? A patrol that heard our noise and came to see what careless species was breaking the silence. Its methodical scanning of our planet, its biology, its technology. This is not scientific curiosity. This is threat assessment. It is studying our anatomy to find our vulnerabilities. It is testing our reflexes. It is evaluating our technological level. And its silence, its refusal of direct contact, is not the caution of a scientist. It is the cold focus of a predator before it pounces. But there is another, no less disturbing possibility. What if contact has already happened long ago, but it went completely differently than we imagined? In the 1950s, astronomer Ronald Bracewell proposed an alternative to classic SETI. He suggested that advanced civilizations wouldn't waste energy on continuous radio broadcasts in all directions. Instead, they would send out small, long-lived, autonomous probes throughout the galaxy. Bracewell probes. These probes would drift silently in interstellar space, waiting for a young technological civilization to appear nearby. Upon detecting our first radio signals, such a probe would wake up enter orbit in our system, and attempt to establish contact. But how would it do that? It wouldn't transmit a complex mathematical message. It would do something much simpler and more effective. It would simply repeat one of our own signals back to us, to show, I am here. I hear you. I am artificial. Now let's look at the wow signal again. What if it wasn't a signal from them? What if it was an echo? What if a Bracewell probe, dormant in our system or on its approach, caught some powerful but entirely terrestrial and random radio pulse from a military radar, for example, and simply reflected it back at us to get our attention? This would explain why the signal was never repeated. The probe had done its job. It said hello, and we didn't understand. We mistook it for a natural mystery and continued searching, and it remained here, waiting, watching, for decades. And 3i Atlas is that very probe. It waited for 40 years, observing our development. And perhaps what it saw disappointed it. It saw our wars, our lies, our inability to unite even in the face of global threats. And it decided we were not ready for a dialogue. It switched from passive observation to active study, to that very planetary acupuncture we are witnessing. It is trying to understand what is wrong with us. Is our aggression an innate, incurable trait? Or is it just a growing pain that can be cured? This hypothesis is no less terrifying than the dark forest, because it turns us from a potential victim into a patient on an operating table. And the surgeon is cold, dispassionate, and possibly prepared for amputation if he deems the tumor to be malignant. Our games of concealment, our geopolitical paranoia, the system's reaction to its presence, all of this goes onto its diagnostic chart. It is diagnosing us. And we don't even know by what criteria it is judging us. Both of these hypotheses, the dark forest and the Bracewell probe, shatter our cozy worldview. They strip us of our status as subjects and turn us into objects. We are no longer the main characters of our own story. We are supporting characters in someone else's drama, the rules of which are unknown to us. And this realization gives rise to the deepest existential horror, the horror of the fragility of our existence. Our entire civilization, all our art, all our science, all our love and hate, all of it could be erased in an instant by a decision made by an intelligence for whom we are nothing more than a line in a report. We spend trillions on weapons to defend ourselves from each other, not realizing that our true vulnerability is not on Earth. It is in our shared planetary isolation. We are the crew of one small ship, sailing on an infinite dark ocean. And instead of rowing together, we are fighting over the helm, not noticing that on the horizon, the fin of something vast and incomprehensible has already appeared. But perhaps there is a third way, a third interpretation that leaves room for hope. What if 3i Atlas is neither a hunter nor a doctor? What if it is a gardener? What if life in the universe is not an accident but a purposeful process? The panspermia hypothesis, the idea that life on Earth was brought from space, is becoming increasingly popular in the scientific community. But what if it wasn't a random infection, but a deliberate seeding? What if, billions of years ago, some ancient progenitor civilization sent out probes across the galaxy, carrying the seeds of life? And now, after eons, their descendants, other automated probes, are returning to check on what has grown on their cosmic farm. 3i Atlas is the agronomist who has come to inspect his crop. Its scanning is a soil analysis. Its effect on our magnetic field is a check of the planet's irrigation system. And its interest in us is the interest in the most unusual, most promising, but also the most dangerous plant in its garden. A plant that has gained consciousness, but with it, the capacity for self-destruction. In this worldview, we cease to be a victim or a patient. We become hope, an experiment, on the success of which something much greater than our own fate may depend. But this is also the greatest responsibility. because a gardener can not only water and fertilize, he can also weed. If he decides that we are a weed threatening the rest of the garden, his decision will be swift and merciless. The dark forest, the cosmic hospital, the galactic garden. We do not know which of these scenarios we are living in, and this uncertainty is the essence of our existential condition. We have woken up in a room, not knowing if it is a prison, a hospital, or a laboratory. We only know that we are no longer alone, and that someone is standing behind the door, and that someone is now turning the key in the lock. The disturbing conclusion is that the answer to these questions may not be what we hoped for. Perhaps the silence of space is not the absence of life. Perhaps it is the sign of respect the living pay to the dead. Or perhaps it is the silence of a gardener who, bending over a flower bed, decides which sprout to keep and which to pull out by the root. The philosophical abyss we have peered into leaves us in a state of dizziness and awe. But an investigation cannot forever hover in the clouds of metaphysical speculation. Sooner or later, it must return to the solid ground of facts, dates, and events. And now, with the existential stakes clearer than ever, we must shift our focus from the past to the future, because this drama is far from its finale. On the contrary, we are approaching its climax. The cosmic schedule has already marked the next event, the next moment of truth, which could either confirm our boldest theories or completely refute them. And the system, as we will see, is already preparing for this event, building new bastions of silence and disinformation. We are talking about the European space mission named Hera. Officially on paper, the Hera mission is a triumph of international cooperation and humanity's first ever attempt at planetary defense. Its target is the double asteroid Didymos and its moonlet, Dimorphos. A few years ago, NASA's DART probe, Double Asteroid Redirection Test, successfully slammed into Dimorphos to see if we could alter an asteroid's orbit if it were to threaten Earth. It was a game of cosmic billiards. DART was the cue, Dimorphos was the ball. And now, Hera is flying there to study the aftermath of this impact. Like a detective at a crime scene, it will have to meticulously measure the crater, assess the change in Dimorphos' orbit, and gather all possible data on the structure and composition of these asteroids. It is an important, noble, and completely transparent scientific mission. At least, that's how it appears on the surface. But in a world where we have learned to see choreography and coincidences, even the noblest of goals begins to arouse suspicion. Let's look at the timeline. The DART mission was launched in late 2021. It reached its target in September 2022. But the Hera mission, which should have launched around the same time to arrive at the asteroid as quickly as possible, was inexplicably delayed. Its launch was postponed to October 2024. The official explanation was budget difficulties and technical delays related to the pandemic. This sounds plausible. But in the context of our investigation, this delay takes on an entirely different meaning. It creates a window of several years during which the asteroid Didymos and its wounded moon will fly alone, awaiting their investigator. And it is precisely within this time window, by a strange coincidence, that a very important event falls. The close flyby of 3I Atlas past Earth. Now let's look at the trajectories. This is pure celestial mechanics, accessible to anyone who knows how to use NASA's Horizons online orbit calculator. At the moment of its closest approach to Earth, expected in 2026, 3E Atlas will follow a trajectory that, when viewed from Earth, will pass very close to the point in the sky where the Didymos Dimorphos system will be at that moment. They will appear in almost the same sector of the sky. A coincidence? Perhaps. But in this story, we have long since stopped believing in coincidences. What if the true, unspoken goal of the Hera mission is not to study the effects of the DART impact? What if that's just a convenient and perfectly legal cover story? What if its real target is 3I Atlas? Imagine this scenario. The European Space Agency, ESA, launches its spacecraft. It flies along its official published trajectory to the asteroid Didymos. The whole world is watching. Amateur astronomers are tracking its position. Everything is transparent. But on board Hera, in addition to its official scientific instruments, cameras, a laser altimeter, spectrometers, there is another, undeclared passenger. A small, autonomous subprobe. Let's call it Odysseus. At a certain point, when Hera is at its maximum distance from Earth and observation is difficult, it performs a small, almost imperceptible maneuver, and Odysseus separates. It uses its own small engine to adjust its trajectory, and its new trajectory no longer leads to Didymos. It leads to an intercept course with 3I Atlas. It's a classic false flag operation transposed to space. The official mission serves as the perfect cover for a secret one. Sounds like paranoid delusion? Perhaps. But let's look at the facts. A few months ago, strange changes were made to the technical documentation of the Hera mission, published on the ESA website. A new section appeared in the onboard computer specifications describing protocols for autonomous maneuvering under unforeseen gravitational perturbations. And on the equipment list, an additional radioisotope power source suddenly appeared, its output clearly excessive for the mission's stated tasks. When journalists from specialized publications asked about these changes, the response from ESA was vague. These are standard measures to increase mission reliability. But for the seekers, it was a clear signal. They are preparing. They are preparing for their spacecraft to operate near a massive, gravitationally unpredictable object. And they are giving it extra power so it can operate longer and transmit more data. Why do they need this? Why risk an entire mission just to get closer to 3I Atlas? Because it's their only chance. The only chance to get the very data they hid after the James Webb observation, but this time from close range. To get high-resolution images. To analyze the composition of its surface not from afar, but up close. To try to intercept its internal communications or energy leaks. And perhaps something more. On board Hera are two small CubeSats, miniature satellites the size of a shoebox. One of them, Juventus, is designed to study the internal structure of Dimorphos with a low-frequency radar. But what if this radar can not only receive, but also transmit? What if its real task is not to X-ray the asteroid, but to send a powerful, focused pulse towards 3I Atlas? Not to attack it, but to ping it, to provoke a reaction, to force it to show itself. This is an incredibly risky game. They are about to poke a sleeping dragon with a stick to see what it really looks like. This is precisely why they are so desperately clinging to the Russian microwave story. This is why they are building this wall of silence. They need time. Time until 2026. They need the world to remain in the dark so that no one interferes with their secret operation. They are creating a global theater of distraction while, in the backyard, they prepare for the most important mission in human history. We are all watching the stage, where a boring play about planetary defense is being performed, unaware that behind the curtains, the directors are preparing to meet the true author of the play. The countdown has already begun. October 2024, the launch of Hera. 2026, the flyby of 3I Atlas. This is our window into the future. These are the next moments of truth. And we must be ready. We must watch. Not only 3I Atlas itself, but also Hera. Track its every maneuver. Analyze every byte of its telemetry that will be released to the public. Look for discrepancies. Look for traces of that secret Odysseus. Because the system will most likely try to control the information again. They will publish beautiful pictures of the asteroid Dimorphos, talk about the successes of planetary defense, but the most important data The data that will come from the secret subprobe will end up in the same classified archives where the web data already lies. Their plan is almost perfect. But they haven't accounted for one thing: the human factor. They haven't considered that within their own ranks, in the ESA mission control centers, in the scientific teams working on the mission, there are people, scientists, engineers, people who entered this profession not to serve the interests of military intelligence, but to explore the universe. And sooner or later, one of them will see an anomaly, will see a strange maneuver, will intercept an undeclared signal, and will face a choice: obey the order of silence or risk everything and pass the truth to those who are searching for it. And we must be ready to receive that signal. Because the next leak, the next breakthrough, may not come from an amateur astronomer, but from the very heart of the system. And it will be a signal that changes everything. The Hera mission is officially designed to study asteroids, but its true, unspoken purpose may be entirely different. It may become our first ambassador, or our last mistake. In this grand cosmic drama, where the fate of humanity is at stake, it's easy to get lost in the scale of it all. We talk about interstellar probes, global conspiracies, shadow government committees. The pieces on this board are so large that individuals seem like nothing more than dust motes, grains of sand on the shore of a boundless ocean. But this is a dangerous illusion, because history, any history, is not made by impersonal systems. It is made by people, by their choices, their courage, their fears. And to truly understand the essence of this information war, we must shift our focus for a moment from telescopes and secret satellites to those who stand behind them, to the seekers, to the Davids who dared to challenge the Goliath of the global cover-up, because their story is an equally important part of this saga. Let's return to the Atacama Desert in Chile, to Stephen Burns' small, windswept observatory. After he published his discovery, his Chris's signature, his life changed. He expected a reaction from the scientific community. He expected debates, criticism, perhaps even ridicule. But instead, there was silence. A deafening, icy silence. Not a single major scientific journal would consider his paper for publication. Not a single renowned astrophysicist commented on his data publicly. He was simply ignored, as if his discovery didn't exist. This was the first, most subtle level of pressure: intellectual isolation. The system didn't argue with him. It just pretended he wasn't there. For a scientist, for a man who has dedicated his life to the search for truth, there's nothing more terrifying than being erased from the conversation. But that was only the beginning. A few weeks after the publication, strange things started to happen. One night, during another observation session, his system suddenly crashed. All his computers froze simultaneously. When he rebooted them, gigabytes of archived data, including the original files with the signature, were corrupted irrecoverably. He was an experienced cybersecurity specialist. His system was protected by multiple layers of defense. A random failure was virtually impossible. This was an attack, a clean, professional, surgical strike. They didn't just delete the data. They corrupted it in a way that would look like an accident, an equipment failure, to leave him with no proof. Fortunately, Burns, out of old spy habit, kept a backup on a completely isolated, air-gapped hard drive. They had underestimated his paranoia. Then the financial problems began. The bank where he kept his life savings suddenly froze his account, citing suspicious activity. A months-long bureaucratic review began, cutting him off from his own money. He had to sell some of his unique equipment just to survive. This was no longer a hint. It was a direct warning. Stop. Don't dig any further. We can ruin your life without leaving any fingerprints. But they hadn't counted on one thing: Stephen Burns was a man who had already lost everything he held dear, faith in the system he had served. He had nothing left to lose, and the pressure only strengthened his resolve. He realized that if they were so desperate to shut him up, he must be on the right track. Burns's story is not unique. Around the world, other seekers, key members of Project Chimera Echo, began to face similar problems. A young female programmer from India who wrote the core algorithm for finding Chris's signature in archives suddenly lost her prestigious job at a major IT corporation. The official reason was restructuring. But she was fired the day after she discovered another correlation, this time involving anomalies in the operation of China's fast radio telescope. An independent geophysicist from Germany, who had linked the attacks to nodes in the geomagnetic grid, became the subject of a tax audit that paralyzed his small consulting firm. It was a coordinated global campaign of intimidation. The system used its limitless bureaucratic and technical resources to pressure the most active and dangerous researchers. It didn't send men in black. It acted much more subtly. It used laws, regulations, and algorithms. It turned civilization itself into a weapon against those who tried to uncover its secrets. But their work did not go unnoticed. Shortly after publishing his findings in the beginning of his troubles, Stephen Burns started receiving strange, encrypted messages. They came from anonymous addresses, through chains of proxy servers, and were signed with a single word: Argus. In Greek mythology, Argus was the 100-eyed giant, the perfect guardian who could never be caught off guard. These messages contained no direct threats or promises. They contained data. Small but extremely valuable fragments of information that could only have come from inside the system. The anonymous Argus sent Burns an internal ESA memo discussing those very redundant radioisotope generators for the Hera mission. He sent a fragment of a satellite image taken by a classified military apparatus, showing a faint thermal trace near 3I Atlas, the very proof that was missing to confirm the object had an internal power source. He even sent a draft of a psychological profile of one of the diplomats affected in Havana, compiled by CIA analysts, which stated in plain terms that the subject exhibits cognitive impairments inconsistent with known forms of psychosomatic disorders or acoustic exposure. Who was this Argus? Was it one person or a group of people? A high-ranking official in the Vienna subcommittee plagued by his conscience? Or a team of young engineers at ESA who realized their mission was being used as a front? Burns didn't know. But he understood the most important thing. They were not alone. Inside Goliath itself, in its veins and arteries, there are cells fighting the disease of lies. There are people who understand that concealing a truth of this magnitude is a crime not against any single state, but against all of humanity. They cannot speak out openly. The system would destroy them immediately. But they can help. They can be the eyes and ears of the seekers inside the fortress walls. They can pass along the very keys that unlock the locked doors. This realization changed everything. It transformed a scattered group of lone enthusiasts into a genuine intelligence network. The seekers on the outside and Argus on the inside. They began to work in tandem. The seekers would formulate questions based on their external analysis, and Argus, whenever possible, would try to find the answers in classified databases. It was a dangerous game. Every file transmitted, every message sent was a huge risk for Argus. But they continued, because they understood that what was at stake was more than their careers, or even their freedom. What was at stake was humanity's right to know the truth about its place in the universe. This story of the human factor is not just a lyrical digression. It is a crucial part of our investigation. It shows that the system is not a monolithic, omnipotent leviathan. It, like any human structure, is made up of people, and there is always room for doubt, for conscience, for dissent. It proves that citizen science and independent inquiry are not just hobbies for eccentrics. In an age of total information control, they are the last bastion of freedom. They are our only chance to learn the truth when official institutions decide that the truth is too dangerous for us. Stephen Burns, the programmer from India, the geophysicist from Germany, they are not superheroes. They are ordinary people who simply chose not to look away. And their courage, multiplied by the secret help of those like Argus, created a force that the system had to reckon with. The war for the truth about 3I Atlas is not just a battle of telescopes and algorithms. It is a battle of the human spirit against the impersonal machinery of control. And the outcome of this battle is far from decided. And now, armed with this new knowledge of the internal struggle within the system's ranks, of the secret Argus network, of the targeted pressure on independent researchers, we must do what any investigator does at the end of a long journey. We must return to the beginning, to the very first event, to that night in Havana when the world first heard the whisper of the syndrome. We must look at this trickster event with fresh eyes, through the lens of everything we have learned. And then, what seemed to us a chaotic, almost random attack will appear in a completely different, much more sinister and calculated light. We thought it was the overture. But what if it was the finale of an entirely different play, hidden from our view? And only now are we beginning to understand its true design. Let's go back to 2016. Let's recall the official cover story we were offered. Cuba, the island of freedom. A place where, for decades, the interests of American and Soviet and later Russian intelligence agencies clashed. And then, after long years of hostility, a historic thaw occurs. Barack Obama restores diplomatic relations. The U.S. Embassy reopens in Havana. A new era seems to be dawning, and it is at this very moment, in this symbolic place, that the attacks begin. The perfect scenario for the Russian version. Who else could be so interested in derailing this détente? Who else could so brazenly and audaciously strike right under the CIA's nose? It all fit. The place, the time, the geopolitical context, everything pointed to Moscow. The system didn't just find a convenient scapegoat. It found the perfect scapegoat. The stage was set flawlessly. But now let's look at it from another perspective. What if the choice of Havana as the first target was not accidental, but for a completely different reason? What if it wasn't about geopolitics, but physics? What's in Cuba besides cigars, rum, and old American cars? It is home to one of the most unique and little-studied geophysical anomalies on the planet, the Cuban anomaly. It's a region where the Earth's magnetosphere, our natural shield protecting us from cosmic radiation and solar wind, has a strange, weakened structure. It sort of sags closer to the surface. It's not as powerful an anomaly as the famous South Atlantic anomaly, but it exists, and its parameters are still a subject of scientific debate. Now let's recall our conclusion from Act 7. 3I Atlas targets the nodes of the planet's geomagnetic grid. What if Havana was chosen not because of the embassy? What if the embassy was just a convenient target, a biosensor that happened to be in the right place at the right time? What if the real target was the anomaly itself? 3I Atlas wasn't sabotaging negotiations. It was conducting its first calibration experiment. It aimed its beam at one of the most sensitive and thin points of the planetary shield to see what the reaction would be. And the people, the diplomats and spies, became simply collateral damage. Lab mice who were unlucky enough to be inside the laboratory when the equipment was turned on. This hypothesis changes the entire picture. It turns a geopolitical thriller into a scientific experiment. But it doesn't explain the main thing. Why did the system cling so fiercely to the Russian version? After all, with their access to geomagnetic field data, They couldn't have been unaware of the Cuban anomaly. And this is where Argus comes to our aid again. One of the most cryptic files he passed to Stephen Burns contained no formulas or secret maps. It was a printout of a transcript of a very strange phone call that took place 3 days before the first American diplomat in Havana reported symptoms. The conversation was between two unidentified individuals. One, judging by his accent, was a high-ranking American official. The other spoke with a distinct Russian accent. They didn't use names. They spoke in Aesopian language. But the essence of their conversation was clear. They were making a deal. They were discussing the upcoming event and how it should be interpreted for the general public. The American spoke of the need to create a single, understandable narrative. The Russian replied that this also serves our long-term interests. At the end of the conversation, the Russian uttered a phrase that sent a chill down Burns' spine. "Don't worry. Our guys in Havana are ready to play their part. The bear will leave enough tracks to keep the hunters happy." What does this mean? It means something unthinkable. It means the Russian version was not just a convenient fabrication by the Americans. It was a joint operation, a play staged by two supposedly sworn enemies. But why? Cui bono? Who benefited? The answer is simple. Both of them. Imagine the situation. Both American and Russian intelligence, thanks to their space forces, detect 3I Atlas at roughly the same time. They understand what they're dealing with. They understand the scale of the threat, or conversely, the potential gain. And they understand that this is a secret that must be kept at all costs. But how do you keep a secret when the weapon starts operating and there are victims? You need to create a diversion. And what could be better than a good old-fashioned spy war? They made a secret pact, a new kind of Molotov-Ribbentrop pact, but not about dividing the world, but about dividing the truth. The Americans take on the role of the victim and create media noise, and the Russians agree to be the villain. They deliberately take the fall. Their agents in Havana start acting suspiciously, leaving tracks to reinforce the legend. It was a brilliant, cynical, flawlessly executed gambit. They used their own enmity as a smokescreen. They sacrificed the health of a few dozen of their own people and the reputation of their country to hide a much more terrifying truth. And only now do we begin to understand. The AWS outage wasn't just a coincidence. It was cover. And what they were hiding wasn't on the servers. It was in the signal itself. Let's go back a little further to that GPS glitch in January 2016. We thought it was the first test of the weapon. But what if it wasn't? What if it was a message? Remember where the beam was aimed? At an empty point in the Pacific Ocean? But what's there? There, on the seabed, at a depth of several kilometers, is one of the key stations of the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Monitoring System, a network of ultra-sensitive hydrophones capable of detecting the sound of a nuclear explosion anywhere on the planet. This system is always on. It's always listening. And then, Argus passed another piece of data to Burns. A raw, unprocessed recording from one of these hydrophones made at the very second 3I Atlas blinded the GPS satellites. There was no explosion on the recording. There was a sound. That same sound. The pulsating high-frequency screech and low-frequency hum that diplomats in Havana would later describe. But this time, it was recorded. Not in the air, but in the water. This discovery turns everything on its head. It means the first documented incident did not happen in Havana. It happened in the ocean. And the system, both the Americans and the Russians who have access to the system's data, knew about it. They knew the nature of the sound. They knew its source. They knew everything. Even before the first person was harmed. And this transforms their subsequent actions from a mere cover-up into a monstrous crime. They didn't just hide the truth from the world. They knowingly allowed their own people to be hit. They used them as living detectors, as guinea pigs, to study the effect of this phenomenon on the human body. The embassy in Havana wasn't just a diversion. It was a pre-planned, cold-blooded scientific and psychological operation. They sacrificed their pawns to understand how the opponent's queen moves. And now that we know this, the entire story appears not just as a conspiracy, but as a betrayal by the system of the very people it was supposed to protect. And this final, shocking revelation doesn't just tie all the threads together. It calls into question the very nature of power and trust in our world. If they are capable of this, what else are they capable of? And the most terrifying question is, what do they plan to do next when 3-Eye Atlas approaches Earth at arm's length? Awareness is a heavy burden. There are doors that, once opened, make it impossible to return to the cozy room of ignorance. The truth we have unearthed is not just a set of facts. It is a radioactive isotope that will now forever hum in our consciousness, changing our perception of everything we see. We, you, our viewers, and we, the storytellers, now possess tragic knowledge. We see the threads connecting events. We hear the lie in official statements. We feel the cold logic behind what the world considers chaos. We are standing on a mountaintop from which the entire picture is visible, while down in the valley, billions of people continue to live their ordinary lives, unaware of the tectonic shifts happening at the very foundation of their reality. This knowledge does not grant power. It grants a feeling of profound isolation. Imagine Stephen Burns sitting in his observatory in the Atacama. He looks at the same stars as millions of people around the world, but he doesn't see a romantic scattering of diamonds on black velvet. He sees a coordinate grid. He sees threat vectors. He sees a silent, mathematically precise choreography unfolding above the heads of a sleeping humanity. Every meteor flash makes him flinch. Is it an artifact? A new signature? Every internet outage makes him check the ephemerides. Is it a new test? He can no longer simply enjoy the beauty of the cosmos. For him, space has ceased to be a source of inspiration. It has become a battlefield. He carries this knowledge alone, surrounded only by the hum of his servers and the silence of the desert. Or imagine that anonymous engineer at ESA, our Argus. Every day he goes to work at a state-of-the-art mission control center. He drinks coffee with his colleagues, discusses ordinary work problems with them, sensor calibration, fuel consumption calculations. But he knows that the true purpose of the mission they are all working on is hidden from them. He sees lines of code on his screen that are not meant for studying an asteroid, but for hunting an alien. He is forced to smile and make small talk, while inside him screams the awareness that he is an accomplice to the greatest deception in history. Every encrypted message he sends to Burns is an act of incredible courage, but also an act of betrayal against the system that feeds him. He lives in constant fear of exposure, but an even greater fear for him is to remain silent. He is trapped in a glass prison where everyone around him sees one thing, and he sees something else entirely. And we, you and I, are now in that prison too. We can no longer read the news about Havana Syndrome with a sense of detachment, writing it off as the antics of Russian spies. We see behind those headlines the cold calculation of the Vienna subcommittee, sacrificing its own people. We cannot watch the launch of the Hera mission with excitement, admiring the achievements of European science. We see in it the launch of a Trojan horse, a secret mission that could provoke an unpredictable reaction. The world, for us, has split in two. There is the official, visible reality. The one broadcast on television, written in newspapers, discussed in parliaments. And there is the hidden, true reality, where completely different forces and laws operate. And the most agonizing part of this knowledge is our powerlessness. What can we do? Tell everyone the truth? But who would believe us? We would be called conspiracy theorists, madmen, alarmists. The system would unleash its full power upon us. An army of fact-checkers and experts would prove that all our evidence is just coincidence and misinterpretation. Our channels would be blocked, our names discredited. We would be buried under an avalanche of information noise. In the modern world, truth is not what is proven, but what the majority believes. And the majority will always choose a simple, comforting lie over a complex, frightening truth. They would rather believe in evil Russians than in a dispassionate cosmic intelligence for whom we are no more than insects. This is the burden of tragic knowledge. We see the strings. We see the choreography. But the puppet master remains in the shadows. And he is so immense that the very attempt to point a finger at him seems like madness. We find ourselves in the position of characters in a Greek tragedy. Like Cassandra, we can foresee the future, but no one will believe our prophecies. Like Prometheus, we have brought the fire of knowledge to humanity, but for this we will be chained to the rock of public condemnation. We bear the responsibility for what we know, but we have no power to change anything. And this gives rise to a profound melancholy. The world goes on, people fall in love, argue, plan vacations, worry about gas prices, and we stand on the sidelines of this stream, our eyes reflecting the cold, inhuman light of a distant star that is not really a star. But knowledge is not only a burden, it is also a responsibility to keep watching, to keep connecting the dots, to keep speaking, even if only in a whisper, in a small circle of those who are willing to listen. Because the story is not over. The launch of Hera lies ahead. The close flyby of 3i Atlas lies ahead. And in those moments, our role, the role of the knowing, will become critical. We will be the ones who can distinguish truth from disinformation. We will be the ones who can see in the official data the hidden signal that everyone else will miss. We are the guardians of the alternative version. We are the collective memory of this event, which the system will try to erase. And the most terrifying question this knowledge leaves is the question of the future. Not the future of humanity as a whole, but our future. What do we do with this knowledge? Try to forget and return to a normal life? Or accept our role and continue to keep this watch, knowing that we will most likely receive neither recognition nor gratitude? This is the choice that now faces each of us. Now that you know what you know, will you be able to look at the night sky the same way? Will you be able to trust the news? Will you be able to believe in the steadfastness of our world? We see the strings. We see the choreography. But the puppet master remains in the shadows. And the most terrifying question is not what happens next, but are we next on his stage? Until now, he has only studied us from a distance. But now, he is flying towards us. And when the curtain rises for the next act, we may not be in the audience. We may be in his spotlight. And we will have to play our part, whether we want to or not. Tragic knowledge provides no answers. It only asks one final, most important question. Now that we know, what do we do? And the answer to that is not in any secret file. It is something each of us must find within ourselves. So, our investigation comes to a close. But the story does not. We have come a long way. From mysterious sounds in Havana hotels to the cold depths of space, from declassified Cold War reports to encrypted messages from anonymous insiders, we have dismantled the official version and seen its falsehood. We have built an alternative hypothesis and confirmed its frightening logic. We have peered into the technological and philosophical abyss that this mystery opens before us. we have realized the burden of knowledge that now rests on our shoulders. So, what is the bottom line? What conclusion can be drawn from all this? The answer is simple and unsettling. There are no final conclusions. There is only an open ending, and a call to vigilance. Let's go over the key points of our journey one last time to solidify the picture in our minds. We started with Havana Syndrome, a series of unexplained attacks on diplomats around the world. The system offered us a convenient enemy, Russia, using a secret microwave weapon. But we proved that a ground-based application of such a weapon is practically impossible due to colossal energy requirements. The first crack. Then we discovered a perfect 100% correlation between all incidents and the position of the interstellar object 3I Atlas in the sky. Coincidence began to look like choreography. The second crack. We learned that key data on 3I Atlas, obtained by the James Webb Space Telescope, was classified under the absurd pretext of an interagency review. The cover-up became obvious. The third crack. And then came the breakthrough. The discovery by amateur astronomer Stephen Burns, who captured visual evidence of an energy beam traveling from the object to Earth. The hypothesis became a theory, and it went deeper. We linked the activity of 3I Atlas to other anomalies. The GPS system failure, the mysterious update of SETI protocols, and even the WOW signal from 1977. The picture went from local to global and historical. We uncovered the system's motives, understanding that concealment is its only possible survival strategy. We analyzed the physical properties of the object itself and concluded that it is an artificial probe. We saw that its targets are not people, but key nodes of the planet's energy system. We learned about the upcoming Hera mission as a possible cover for a secret intercept operation. We saw the human face of this war, the courage of the Seekers, and the secret help of Argus. And finally, we returned to the beginning and realized that even the Russian version was not just a lie, but part of a cynical collusion between superpowers. We have assembled all the pieces of the puzzle, and the picture that has emerged is staggering. We live in a world where a representative of an unknown, immeasurably more advanced intelligence glides silently above our heads. This intelligence is in no hurry to make contact. Instead, it methodically, cold-bloodedly, and perhaps not without harm to us, studies our planet, our technologies, and us. At the same time, world governments, aware of this, have entered into a conspiracy to completely conceal this information. They lie to us, manipulate us, and even sacrifice their own people to buy time in a secret race for this visitor's technology. We are in a double blind spot. On one hand, we are being studied by an incomprehensible external intelligence. On the other, we are being manipulated by our own, quite comprehensible, but no less dangerous, power structures. We are mice in a maze that was not designed for us, and the experiment is being watched by two lab assistants with completely different, but equally unknown, objectives. What happens next? That is the main question that remains open. The script for our future has several likely branches, and none of them look particularly optimistic. Scenario 1. The quiet acquisition. 3I Atlas continues its research. The system continues its cover-up. The topic of Havana Syndrome finally fades from the news, written off as a mass psychogenic illness. A convenient diagnosis for anything that doesn't fit into the Procrustean bed of official science. The Hera mission successfully studies its asteroid, and its secret subprobe either fails, or its data remains buried in classified archives forever. Life goes on. But beneath the surface, unnoticed by most, the influence of 3I Atlas on our planet may be growing. Perhaps its acupuncture is not just scanning, but a slow terraforming of our planet for its own needs. A change in the magnetic field, an influence on the climate, an effect on the biosphere at a subtle, genetic level. We may not even notice our world ceasing to be ours. We will simply wake up one day in someone else's garden, grown for someone else's purposes. Scenario 2. The loud failure. Something goes wrong. Hera's secret operation provokes a reaction from 3i Atlas that can no longer be hidden. It could be a demonstrative and massive show of force, disabling the entire global network, taking out all satellites, a directed strike on some landmark object on Earth. In this case, the system's lie would collapse overnight. Global panic, chaos, the collapse of all social and economic structures would begin. Governments would lose all credibility. Humanity would find itself face to face with a power it itself has awakened. It would be a contact scenario, but not the one science fiction writers dreamed of. It would be the contact between an entomologist and a disturbed anthill. Scenario 3. The schism. The truth comes out, but not because of 3i Atlas's actions, but because of a leak from within the system itself. Someone from the Argus group decides they can no longer remain silent and passes irrefutable proof to the Seekers. That very web data, or the telemetry from the secret subprobe. The world fractures. Some people will believe the truth. Others will brand it as enemy disinformation. Information civil wars will begin. Governments will accuse each other. A new, most dangerous arms race in history will emerge. A race to see who can first establish contact or copy the technology. Instead of uniting in the face of the unknown, we would most likely be at each other's throats, proving that it is our nation, our religion, our ideology that should represent humanity in this first contact. And 3i Atlas will silently watch as we destroy ourselves, doing all the dirty work for it. Which of these scenarios will play out? We don't know. Perhaps none of them. Perhaps reality will prove to be even stranger and more unpredictable. But one thing is clear. We are living in the most interesting and perhaps the most dangerous time in the history of our species. The rules of the game have changed. A new piece has appeared on the board, and we still don't know how it moves. Therefore, our investigation does not end. It merely enters a new phase. A phase of constant, unblinking observation. Our mission, like the mission of seekers around the world, is to keep watching, to keep listening, to keep asking uncomfortable questions and not trusting simple answers. We will monitor the launch of Hera. We will analyze the trajectory of 3i Atlas. We will look for new signatures, new coincidences, new leaks. This is our watch. And we invite you to stand it with us. Do not let the information noise lull your vigilance. The next time you hear about an unexplained technological glitch or a strange geophysical phenomenon, don't dismiss it. Open a star chart. Check where our silent visitor is at that moment. Learn to see the choreography where others see only randomness. Because in this new reality, curiosity is not just an intellectual exercise. It is a survival tool. The truth is out there, but it will not fall into our laps. It must be fought for. And this fight is not waged on battlefields, but in the minds of people. In your mind. The watch continues. Stay tuned.